Simar Ram, Simar Ram, Simar Ram, Simar Ram, Simar Ram, Ram, Simar 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 Ram, Ram Ram, Simar Ram, Simar.
Welcome back. It's good to have you back. We are heading into the third panel of the day on Guru Tegh Bahadur, his life and his martyrdom. And I have the privilege and the pleasure of introducing the two speakers. First up, we have Sher Singh, who has had multiple careers as an author, a lecturer, litigation lawyer, police commissioner, editor, publisher, and journalist, including stints as a national current affairs columnist, travel writer, television host, and radio commentator. He is also the founder of the online magazine SikhChic.com, the Spinning Wheel Film Festival, the annual Guelph Lecture on Being Canadian, the Centennial Foundation, and Toronto's annual Vaisakhi Gala. He is the author of 2 books of essays, The Lion and the Princess, and India's 1984. The first volume of his memoirs, titled The Accidental Lawyer, is due to be published by the end of this year. He resides in Canada and can be reached at tshersingh@gmail.com. And I'll post that for you in the chat as well. With a reminder that if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to make use of the Q&A box at the bottom. And without further ado, then I'll hand over the virtual podium to you. Mr. Singh, please go ahead.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm grateful to Dr. Sher Singh and his team for the opportunity to share my thoughts in this August gathering. Of course, I'm not an academic, unlike all of the brilliant scholars you will have heard from during this wonderful conference or webinar over the course of this weekend. What I will do is try and give you a different perspective, one from the point of view of a lay person. I want to warn you at the very outset that my thoughts today are not learned. My ruminations on the 400th birth anniversary of Guru Tegh Bahadur, the 9th master, are therefore through the filter of all that has transpired around us and on us since the beginning of last year and continues to occupy us as we come close to the second year of the terrible affliction we have come to know as the coronavirus or COVID-19. This year, 2021, as we remind ourselves of the life and teachings of an extraordinary man, this year, to put it mildly, has been a most unusual year in more ways than one. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I stated that it is bound to go down along with the year immediately preceding and immediately following it as a major watershed in modern human history. Who would have thought that in this age of scientific enlightenment, of widespread education, of excess and privilege and surfeit enjoyed by so many, in this era of wealth and affluence and innovation, who would have thought that we would then be afflicted by a plague that would bring down the rich and the poor in the east, west, in the north, in the south, leaving behind to date anywhere between 5 and 10 million dead, and between 250 million and 500 million souls suffering, directly suffering in this pandemic. Not surprisingly, comparisons have been made with the worst pandemics of the past, including the Black Death of the 14th century. This COVID pandemic, from which we are still reeling, is, according to all that we already know, a direct result of human folly and could easily have been prevented or averted. But the hows and whys of it all is grist for another day, for others who have the time, the mandate, the resources, the expertise to study them. For me, personally, the confluence of Guru Tegh Bahadur's birth anniversary and this most tragic and trying period we are living through is an opportune time for us to reflect on his legacy. A phrase borrowed from a popular song from the 1960s has helped me to capture in my own mind the real life connection between Tegh Bahadur's message and what we have witnessed earlier in this very year. For example, in the very city in which he died and through his death gave some of the finishing touches to the form and substance of the Sikh credo. The words from the song by a group called the Hollies that grabbed me are the title of this talk. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. The lyrics first popped up in my head this past summer as I staggered while watching the news reports from India's capital city, New Delhi, and its neighboring areas. But more about the song a little later. In New Delhi, people were dying in the streets, literally, not just from having caught the COVID virus, but from the lack of hospital, the absence of medical facilities that had any resources to give. In fact, the total absence of medical supplies. And worse, many of the sick were being abandoned on the streets by their own families from a fear of contagion. Worse still, the dead were being left unattended on the streets by their own families. Once again, because of a fear of contagion. The relatives were not willing to risk their lives by transporting the corpses of their loved ones, their own loved ones, to the cremation grounds, or by carrying out any funeral rites. And to make matters even worse, the cremation grounds were overwhelmed by the numbers of the dead arriving at their entrances. Corpses had to be lined up endlessly in the streets, sometimes for days before being cremated. And yet, even worse, the authorities, governmental, hospital, medical, religious, social, institutional, all had thrown up their hands. All of what I have described played out not in isolated instances, but in neighborhoods everywhere, affecting millions of people. And similar scenes were being enacted in other parts of the country. The Ganges, holy to the Hindus, was being choked by bodies being dumped in the river, uncremated, or on its banks, because cremation facilities were simply not available. To be honest, it was nothing short of horror, day after day, week after week, and all of it happened just a few months ago. I'm not talking about past history or another century, another decade. This year, everything I saw in the news reports was a vision of hell, not much different from Dante's own description of Inferno. And I do not exaggerate. You know I'm not exaggerating. And amidst all of it, a ray of sunshine, without a cue from any person or organization or institution, Sikh men and women appeared in the streets of New Delhi and began to provide succor to the ill, the abandoned, the helpless, and the dead. Not to help Sikhs, but the general population, regardless of religion or belief or caste or faith or color. Not just kind words, but free medical supplies, free shelter, free food, free transportation, free oxygen, a life and death necessity, suddenly, which was not even available in the hospitals, not even for the rich, not even for the powerful, not even in the black market, not the oxygen in the air, but in cylinders that were selling for 100 times the normal price and yet could not be obtained. And this, all of this free service provisions were entirely financed by the volunteers from their own pockets or by gurdwaras or by donors from around the world. Some of the gurdwara facilities were almost overnight turned into fully equipped and functional hospitals and were opened to all, free. At the same time, millions of free meals were provided to the hungry and poor, lined up along the highways, homeless, mile after mile after mile. Two more significant facts. Firstly, all of this was begun by Sikhs in the very city where, not long ago, within living memory, innocent Sikh men, women, and children in the thousands had been massacred in broad daylight. The murdering mobs, guided by members of the ruling party, of the government, supported by several Hindutva organizations, with the police, the military looking on and doing nothing. But when the COVID came along, not a moment's thought was given to the notion as to why a victimized minority, which constituted a mere 2% of the country's population, should thus step up to the plate and show the way. No hesitation whatsoever, not a moment's hesitation. The second significant fact is that each and every volunteer Sikh who jumped into the fray to help the needy was instantly and unequivocally putting his or her life in extreme danger. Not surprisingly, many such volunteers contracted the virus as a result of the exposure and died as a result. Let me pause at this juncture to clarify something. I'm not relating the details of what transpired in New Delhi and the rest of India in those difficult days in order to sing the praises of those citizen warriors. Not my caption for them. The Reader's Digest called them, using the picture of these warriors on their cover in their June 2021 edition, and called them citizen warriors. I'm not here to sing the praises of those citizen warriors. Nothing that I have told you so far is a secret from you, is unknown to you. I'm merely leading up to something that has puzzled me ever since. Not that these Sikhs did what they did, but that the Indian populace was taken aback by their grace and integrity in setting an example for other well-meaning Indians to follow. What surprises me is that it surprised India. What was going on in the minds of these Sikhs who automatically, without any prompting or encouragement, left the safety of their homes and at great personal peril went out into the streets to help the helpless? Some went into extremes in what they did. You already know of the teams who drove through the cities in their own vehicles, picking up the abandoned bodies from the streets. Not Sikh corpses, anybody's corpses. Took them, respectfully to the cremation grounds and gave them full religion appropriate funeral rites, paid the priests out of their own pockets, paid for the funerals, for the wood out of their own pockets. The question I have struggled with is why? What is it about this community that made them do what they did? As a purely voluntary, spontaneous, and citizen movement, it was hailed the world over as a remarkable phenomenon. What troubles me is that surge of selflessness that was thus witnessed in the area worst hit by COVID was a unique occurrence. It shouldn't have been unique, it should have been common. I would have felt better if such sentiments in the populace had welled up everywhere with a universal willingness to put your life in danger solely because it was to help save lives, the lives of others who were, of course, total strangers, even in a country, regardless of the fact that it was in a country, in a world torn apart by religious strife and interfaith violence. You know, every religion in the world teaches one form or the other of the age-old dictum: love thy neighbor. The maxim is so universal that it is often presented in one form or the other as the golden rule. It's a sentiment known by all, cited by all, endorsed by all, praised by all, yet despite its pithiness, its simplicity, its directness, its universality, its total unambiguity, it has failed to save the world from the mess it is in. It's almost as if everyone sees some fine print hidden behind the words, beneath the words, love thy neighbor. Does it say, for example, love thy neighbor unless he's not of your faith? Blacks, indigenous people, Roma, LGBTQ, Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, to name but a few groups, have been brutalized and mass murdered in the millions by the very people who display the words, love thy neighbor, in large gold letters in the churches and temples and various places of worship. Every community has had a Holocaust of its own. The Christians who call themselves Nazis, yes, they were all Christians, seemed to read the golden rule as love thy neighbor unless he's a Jew. Half of America today seems to think that the dictum is love thy neighbor unless he's not a white Christian. The Israeli regime seems to think that the maxim reads love thy neighbor unless he's a Palestinian. Many Muslims in the world believe that they are to love thy neighbor, but not if he or she is a non-believer. The right-wing aberration of Hinduism that currently holds India in its stranglehold seems to think that its religious books say, love thy neighbor, unless he or she fails to subscribe to Hindu rituals and superstitions. I could go on ad nauseum with such examples of bad behavior everywhere, within every religion, every faith. Sadly, even my own faith tradition of Sikhi has its fair share of lost souls who think there is a hidden fine print in the teachings of our elders, which only they can see, that it is there up to them to implement this fine print. It represents human ingenuity at its worst. What then sets those citizen warriors of Delhi apart? Because they're indeed a people apart, sadly, a people apart. Sure, there is no shortage of examples from human history which show us how extraordinary sacrifices have been made of life and limb. But every instance that I'm aware of has been expressly to protect your own or further your own beliefs, your own causes. Yes, all of them involve bravery and goodness and self-sacrifice. But the issue raised by the Lions of New Delhi this past summer is what made them give their all in order to save total strangers who actually belonged to a different religion and who had until then demonstrated no love, no empathy, no sympathy for Sikhs. All of which brings me to the death of Guru Tegh Bahadur and what I believe is a direct connection between his life and his death and the actions of his followers 3.5 centuries later in the very same city where he was tortured and executed. A community of Hindu Brahmins located in the region of Kashmir, which fell within the Mughal Empire, had been given an ultimatum by Emperor Aurangzeb, who had the reputation of being a religious zealot and a tyrant. The Kashmiri Pandits were to renounce their faith and embrace Islam, the religion of Aurangzeb, or face death. Friendless and helpless, frightened out of their wits, they sent a delegation 1,000 miles away to Guru Tegh Bahadur, the 9th master of the nascent Sikh community, seeking his intervention as a community leader and begging him to somehow save them. They knew that his teachings rejected much of Hindu practices which Sikhi found abhorrent, but they also knew that he was a man of considerable influence, of a spiritual man, a man of integrity. Regardless of him belonging to a completely different faith, he agreed to help, finding the edict coercing the conversion of members of any religion to another religion as unacceptable. Upon his advice, the Kashmiri Pandits responded to the emperor saying, "We will all convert to Islam only if Guru Tegh Bahadur agrees to convert to Islam, period." Tegh Bahadur was summoned by the emperor to Delhi, where, upon arriving, he refused to renounce Sikhi and embrace Islam. He was tortured and intermittently forced to witness the torture and murder of the Sikhs who had accompanied him to Delhi and who too had refused to follow the imperial edict. Subsequently, Tegh Bahadur was executed outside the ramparts of the Red Fort. The Kashmiri Pandits were thus saved from extinction, sure and guaranteed extinction. And the message of Guru Tegh Bahadur's life and death became a basic pillar of Sikh practice. It is the duty of every Sikh to serve the helpless and the needy and to protect the weak and the oppressed. Integral to that message was that the one in need of help did not have to qualify by sharing the beliefs of the Sikh. No other element came into the picture, as the Sikh was to put public service above his or her personal interest. That, I believe, sets the citizen warriors of Delhi as a people apart. It is a quantum leap from love thy neighbor by leaving no room for small print or footnotes or exceptions. It, in fact, transforms the duty, elevates the duty of each Sikh from the passive to an active one. Mere tolerance, the byword of many a human rights activist today, is not the way of the Sikh. To a Sikh, a mere love thy neighbor means nothing if you're not ready to lay your life down if and when your neighbor needs your help. The citizen warriors of Delhi also demonstrated in real and practical terms that the definition of neighbor is an ever-growing, ever-spreading concentric circle until it encompasses Sarbat Dapala. They also magnificently showed the world that Tegh Bahadur's definition of public service is not predicated on the neighbor being perfect, on the neighbor having to be flawless, to having to be free from fault or wrongdoing. Well, let me explain. A couple of minutes ago, I described to you how Guru Tegh Bahadur, through his ultimate sacrifice, saved the Kashmiri Pandit community from extinction at the hands of the tyrant Aurangzeb. Fast forward to 20th century India. The country boasted 3 prime ministers who not only hailed from the Kashmiri Pandit community, but constantly reminded the populace, bragged that they were Kashmiri Pandits. The first, Jawaharlal Nehru, gave himself the public title of Pandit. History tells us that not long after he became India's first prime minister, Pandit Nehru labeled the Sikhs of India en masse in secret documents as a criminal community and instructed his bureaucrats and administrators to act accordingly. His daughter, Indira Gandhi, also a self-proclaimed Kashmiri Pandit, when she became the country's prime minister, ordered an unwarranted army assault on the holiest of holies of the Sikhs, the Darbar Sahib of Amritsar. Her son, Rajiv Gandhi, also declared himself a Kashmiri Pandit when he became prime minister. He ordered and oversaw the genocide of tens of thousands of innocent Sikh male youth over the course of a decade, which ended in the 1990s. Imagine the very same Kashmiri Pandits who owed so much to the Sikhs. Now, none of these facts posed an impediment for Tegh Bahadur's citizen warriors of Delhi last summer as they went around their business of saving lives as the pandemic raged like wildfire across the country. Single-handedly and uniquely in the annals of humankind, Tegh Bahadur spelled out the true ambit of the message of love thy neighbor and made it truly meaningful and embedded it so deeply in the Sikh psyche that it comes naturally to our men and women, young and old. I'm running out of time. I won't waste your time by turning into a Bible thumper, call it a Bani thumper if you wish, by reciting some of the poetry, some of the shloks by Guru Tegh Bahadur that are enshrined in our Guru Granth Sahib. Some of the stanzas are my very favorite in my language and in any language. I'm a student of literature, I'm a student of English literature, and there's nothing that comes close to the beauty of some of those shloks. There are some that have become steadfast beacons in my life. But you're all learned men and women and know them better than I do. Therefore, I'll conclude by simply quoting a few lines from the song that I mentioned earlier, made popular by the Hollies in a 1969 version and subsequently made even more of a household staple by Neil Diamond. For me personally, it captures what Guru Tegh Bahadur's life, what his death mean to me, and explain to me these words. They explain to me what his citizen warriors today are all about. And here are the words from the lyrics. The road is long, with a many a winding turn that leads us to who knows where. Who knows where, but I'm strong enough to carry him. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. So on we go. His welfare is of my concern. No burden is he to bear. will get there, for I know he would not encumber me. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. If I'm laden at all, I'm laden with sadness that everyone's heart isn't filled with the gladness of love for one another. Thank you for having me. I'm done.